I could spend the next 5 minutes making up descriptions like oozing caramel mid-ranges and blissful tactile bass and wild things like that, or I could just keep it simple and give it to you guys straight. Well, what do we have here? A pair of the new Aiyima A07 Max amps. I guess the third iteration of the A07. We had the original that had all kinds of fanfare, and then the A07 Pro, which added things like tone controls and Bluetooth. And now maybe its final form, the A07 Max? The new A07 utilizes the same TPA 3255 chip, but it's constructed with a much more premium design than the previous iterations. And let's be honest, this isn't likely the last iteration. Maybe the Ultra next year? Let's talk about what we get with the new Max. Let's just cover this one right away because it's one of the more popular features. The ability to put this into mono for substantial power increases. All you have to do is flip this over onto the bottom and select mono from the default stereo mode. Then you'll notice that the LED on the front will indicate that you're in mono mode. From here, it's a bit confusing for some at first. The document that came with the amp during the first release was not really clear on how to accomplish using these as monoblock amps. But in reality, it's super simple. Mind you, there is more than one way to accomplish this, but this is how I would suggest doing it. I also noticed that after a number of people commented on the forums, Aiyima has since updated the pictures, and they're suggesting the same method that I'm using here. Step 1 for this, simply just flip over these amps and select them into mono mode. Going into step 2, this part will vary depending on how you have your system set up, but let's just cover my setup configuration today. A Weem Pro Plus going into my SMSL SU8S DAC. The Weem acting as a preamp for volume control, and the SU8S DAC in fixed volume mode. Make sure you get these right so you don't have any unnecessary volume surprises while hooking these up. From here, we connect the left and right RCA out of the DAC into the left inputs of the A07 Max. When you select these into mono mode, the left input is the only one that's active. From here, you can connect the speakers as labeled on the amp, but do notice that they are connected differently than they would be in stereo mode. That's really it. It's going to leave you with some options and small challenges. As I want to control the volume from my Weem for simplicity, I would have been better served with an option to select a fixed volume mode on the amps rather than a power switch that doubles as a volume control. What I'm doing here is I'm leaving the amps at full volume so that I know I have everything matched and triggering them on and off using a switching or a smart outlet. The potentiometer is fine, and it's actually an advancement over the previous models, this having an analog linear potentiometer, similar to what's on the new Fozzy V3, but to simplify their use as a monoblock, a separate power and volume would have been preferred here. If you're using a single A07 Max, this really won't be relevant, and the included power volume combo works great. Taking a look at the exterior, we have a few notable differences. For one, no screws on the front, and some new case colors. This is moving in the right direction. The casework on some of the early models, like the A07 and its competitors, felt a little bit too industrial, but now things are starting to come together. If we look at the sides and the back, we have some case ventilation. I've yet to notice these get beyond just warm to the touch, nothing even close to hot after playing for a couple of hours. The shape of this actually surprised me as well. I was thinking that it was going to be larger with that wider look, but they're actually quite a bit shorter than previous models from Aiyima, or for instance, the Fozzy V3 shown here. Flipping these to the back, it's mostly familiar, RCA inputs and an auxiliary out, which I really wish was an actual pre-out so that you could easily add a powered sub to the mix. You still can, but the auxiliary output volume will not be in line with the amp volume controls. A workaround for this, if you have it available, is to use speaker level inputs on your sub. It's not as commonly included on subs anymore, but you can still find it on a good number of them. A couple of really nice changes they made to the rear were staggering the binding posts, so you have a little bit more room to work with. Some of the larger banana plugs connected could be a little bit tight in the previous configuration, and the actual binding posts themselves are a lot bigger than what was in the previous designs. It's not like they're premium pieces or anything like that, but they at least get away from the micro binding posts that are on most of the Class D amps, the V3 included. They made a lot of changes on that one, but that one still has the micro posts. As far as power output goes on these, your mileage will vary depending on what power supply you use. These can accept from 24 volt up to 48, but what's included with mine that came from Amazon was a 36 volt 6 amp. Aiyima themselves state that this power supply will push the amp to 94 watts each channel at 8 ohms and 107 at 4. This is in stereo mode. If we configure these in PBTL mono, they claim 118 watts per channel at 8 and 190 at 4. The 48 volt power supply will bump up the power numbers substantially to 102 and 190 at 8 and 120 and 315 at 4 in mono. I haven't ran across any independent tests on these yet, so it's uncertain to what level of distortion these are being measured. But judging by what we've seen on previous designs, this is at least in the ballpark from what we've seen from previous measurements in the default stereo configuration. Mono mode is a bit of an unknown. What I can say beyond the numbers is that I was able to easily power bookshelves as well as floor standing speakers. Power isn't going to be a limitation with these, especially if you have a pair in mono mode. Looking inside, Aiyima made a leap to start using more premium components. Aiyima and Rubicon capacitors, phase mode induction, as well as just improving the design, locating the amp chip to the underside of the board. It's not the first time we've seen this, but what it allows them to do is separate it from the rest of the components. Allow the entire case to be a heatsink for the chip essentially. There has been some discussion about the use of the 50 volt caps combined with the 48 volt power supply on some of the message boards. Is it an issue? I'm honestly not really sure, but what I can tell you is that myself, as well as many other people, have used the 48 volt power supply on the original A07 that also has the 50 volt caps without an issue for a long time. So it's possibly one of those situations where by design, yes, you could definitely make improvements here with the bigger cap, but in actual practice, it may not be relevant. Load dependency is a common complaint on budget Class D amps. A lot of people don't realize what is going on, but just notice more of this harsh sound in the upper frequency ranges with particular speakers. The A07 Max, while not perfect in this category, is said to have made some improvements. The actual value of the A07 Max load impedance from the 4 to 8 ohm range was noted not to exceed 0.8 dB. That's really pretty good. Particular speakers are going to be more susceptible to this depending on their crossover network design, but at the very least, Aiyima is aware of the community's request to improve on this front. Hopefully we're getting closer to some of these amps, including the post-filter feedback, to compensate for this rise. Until then, I'll take the improvements here. It's actually pretty good. Op amp swappers, don't sweat it today. You're free to change to a variety of options on this one too. It's not for everyone, but I actually did enjoy playing around with some of the Sparkos SS3602s on a previous amp review. There's a lot of opinions out there. If you're interested, you don't have to go as expensive as that right off the bat from things like Sparkos. There's a large number of compatible options you can experiment with first. Now that we covered the basics, here's my subjective thoughts on the new A07 Max sound in comparison to the original A07 and a couple touch points on the V3. For one, I felt as if the Max presented in a warmer fashion than the original A07, more of a Class AB type sound if I had to slap a label on it. The bass control and presence is really good. I have these connected to an older but good pair of Polk LSIM 703s in my office. They like power, and these running in mono mode could supply all they needed for really good dynamics, nice powerful sound. The bass coming from a pair of these was more defined than what I was getting from the V3. The V3 gives a really nice smooth sound, but this had just a bit more of a presence in the low frequencies. The mids and highs were an improvement as well over the original A07. I never thought things were coming across harsh or exaggerated on these. It's just a really clean listen coming from a pair of amps that come in under $200 for a set. The sound is clean, there's power to run the vast majority of speakers out there, and it's honestly about as budget friendly as you could get while providing this much clean power. I could spend the next 5 minutes making up descriptions like oozing caramel mid-ranges and blissful tactile bass and wild things like that, or I could just keep it simple and give it to you guys straight. It's an amazingly clean sounding amp for the price. I include for the price because yes, you can obviously beat this if your budget is higher. But for what this can offer for the price, it's an incredible deal. It has a new design with an improved layout, better for connecting speakers, and in the looks department in general. We get a monoblock option that may be a day one purchase for some, but others may purchase a single and then use it as an upgrade path with a pair later on down the road. It's not without flaws like any other product. The auxiliary really should be changed over to a traditional pre-out so we can more easily integrate this with a sub. The volume potentiometer is an upgrade in itself, but I would still prefer to separate it from the power. It makes running these as a dedicated power amp a little more simple and versatile. All in all, I can say I can easily give these a recommendation for really a variety of situations. Cheap enough to use in all the extra spaces like garages, shops, gyms, things along those lines, but good enough to use in a dedicated location as well, as long as you pair it with the right gear and speakers. If you enjoyed today's video, I would really appreciate a like and subscribe. Let's grow this thing together. Plus, I have a lot more fun reviews on the way, like this monster of a sub from PSA, as well as a new reoccurring series that'll cover some hi-fi news. Take care, I'll talk to you later, bye.